Sénateur Boisvenu en débat.
Merci beaucoup.
Senator Boisvenu on debate. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before beginning to speak to Bill C-45, I'd like to apologize for the use of an inappropriate expression when I was striving to describe this drug. I used the expression when I was discussing the bill, and I would like to apologize for that. This is a very emotional subject for me, as some individuals very close to me had their lives destroyed due to the use of this drug. Honorable Senators, I would like to speak today to Bill C-45, a bill which raises more questions than it gives answers. I'd like to be very clear. I would not at all like to call into question the legitimacy for this government to proceed with the legalization of marijuana. Ever since this bill was tabled in the other place, I have taken part in various discussions in Canadian media, and on various occasions, I have seen that parents are very concerned about the negative impacts of legalization of this drug. I would also like to mention my colleague Claude Carignan's excellent work, as well as the entire Legal Affairs Committee. What I've seen is that the more we study this bill, the more we find major and unacceptable gaps when it comes to realizing its objectives, which are protecting youth from cannabis use and ensuring that organized crime does not participate in this sector. As a parent and grandparent, I cannot support this bill in its current form. The more I look at it, the more I think that it should be completely rewritten. This is crucial for the safety of our youth and for our entire society. This bill has too few guidelines to adequately control this new market, its investors, and its producers. This bill shows clearly that this government is making cannabis legalization a political issue and is now doing it too quickly and is pressuring us to adopt an incomplete and unacceptable bill. According to the government, Bill C-45 was supposed to initially meet two objectives: limit organized crime's participation in the sector, and secondly, protect youth from consuming cannabis. When it comes to protecting youth, what I find particularly concerning is that adolescents of 12 to 17 years of age will be allowed to possess or distribute up to 5 grams of dried cannabis, or according to the regulation, 25 grams of fresh cannabis. Very few individuals have demonstrated how Sections 8 and 9 will succeed in removing cannabis from the hands of innocent victims. How can any parent accept such reasoning? For youth, is this truly an effective way to restrict access to recreational cannabis, given its devastating effect on health, their studies, and personality?
Allow me to express my doubt about the use of this drug. It's starting as early as age 9 in some cases. I don't normally agree with Michael Spratt, but this time he was talking about the lack of cohesiveness of this bill.
Who possess more than 5 grams of marijuana, an activity that will be perfectly legal for adults. Nowhere else in the criminal code is a youth criminalized for an act that is legal for an adult. Autrement dit, si vous êtes un adulte et que vous possédez plus que...
In other words, if you're an adult and you have over 30 grams of dry cannabis, you may get a $200 fine. But if you're a youth of age 12 to 17 and you have over 5 grams, you will be exposed to the Youth Criminal Justice Act. And it is a very incohesive situation where we're seeking to protect children. Young people will be entering the youth criminal justice system, and if that is the case, then they may remain there for a long time. This legislation on cannabis also is raising fears among the scientific community, particularly psychiatrists. My colleague said earlier that this is a scientifically recognized compound that triggers psychosis. We have a number of youth who are in psychosis when they show up at the ER at hospitals and having consumed marijuana. I would like to remind you that the 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 Quebec Association of Psychiatrists is recommending that it should not be used by those under the age of 25. The bill, it would be a compromise if the age were set at age 21, according to Edith Baudry, who is a member of the association. Plausible studies confirm that the brain develops until age 25. According to Dr. Karine Boita, president of the Association of Psychiatrists in Quebec, the studies are clear. The higher the THC, the higher use is, the more the symptoms are there. Psychiatrists in Quebec have recommended a maximum of 15 to 16% THC content. We need to continue to study in depth the effects of the use of THC on the human brain. The current situation is insufficient, and legalization represents a huge risk of the unknown. If cannabis is legalized without THC limits, it could reach higher than 30%. We need to find a way to mitigate the dangers to the health of youth who are consuming cannabis. Let's talk about cannabis addiction. Dr. Mondras, a psychobiologist at McLean Hospital, a hospital associated with Harvard, he wrote the following.
Marijuana will be addicted, and those who use it weekly report experiencing bizarre thought, paranoia, and hallucination. Marijuana using adolescent is associated with reduced motivation, poor educational and employment outcomes. For youth aged 12 to 18 in the state of Colorado, past month use of marijuana increased using 20% in 2 years after legalization, compared with the 2 years before legalization. Drug-related suspension and expulsion from school increased 40%. La dépendance au cannabis existe.
Cannabis addiction exists. It can have an impact on the life of youth and also is a financial challenge for parents who have to pay astronomical sums for rehab. I feel that in this bill, a clause should be written that could guarantee that fines on delinquent producers will be used solely for prevention and to financially support rehab centers. This money would be the least it could do, given the little engagement our government has shown to date on awareness raising. Unfortunately, young Aboriginals are also forgotten on this file. The leader of the Abidjois community is concerned about the impact of legalization of marijuana on his community. His concern drew my attention. He said to Radio-Canada on November 22nd, "It's catastrophic for us. There will be higher use and easier access for children. I cannot imagine a scenario like this one. I am angry about the decision by the Government of Canada to have it taken this route. As the leader of my community, youth, like Aboriginal youth, like all youth, do not deserve to be sacrificed for the greater good of the cannabis industry, and there will be hundreds of thousands of dollars used to their detriment." As said Dr. Stanley Vallant, who was also part of the Aboriginal community, if Aboriginal bands can ban use on their lands, some of them are so close to the city that it will be basically ineffective. Remember that children, your children and grandchildren, are supposed to be at the heart of the current government's concerns. Concerning organized crime, which is the second argument that the government uses for legalization, the Journal de Montréal raised a very worrisome situation. 40% of cannabis producers' money comes from tax havens. Don't forget that the money sent to tax haven largely comes from organized crime, who have been selling illegal drugs in Canada. And yet the bill will not penalize the individuals who are breaking the illicit substances laws. This is a very gray zone for which organized crime will control part of the market, the legal marketing for cannabis. In Section 5.1, there is a $300,000 fine and maximum imprisonment of 2 years, one or the other, if flavors are added to tobacco. However, with C45, an organization that uses youth to sell marijuana will face maximum fines of $100,000, $300,000 for tobacco, $100,000 for marijuana. It's a double standard, and there's nothing to prevent them to go through the back door of organized crime. The minister is proposing allowing the growth of 4 plants per home, but there is no system to trace, and it will cost millions of dollars. It will be useless to catch individuals who are trafficking marijuana. Worse, if you have 1 or 2 plants too many, the fine will be $200 when the value of this production will be between $1,000 and $2,000. We strongly believe that this will not allow police officers to fight the gray market, marijuana sold in a very subtle fashion illegally. The GE program on TVA looked at dismantling crime networks. The show doubts that organized crime will be affected by the legislation. They don't have to pay tax. They don't have to look at collective agreements, and they're already decreasing their production costs. It will be like contraband cigarettes. I remind you that just in Estrie, 40% of cigarettes smoked by high school students are purchased illegally. 40%. As soon as taxes increase, legal consumers will turn to the illegal market.
Opportunity to show leadership for forbidding the sale of cannabis through internet. As of right now, provinces will need to decide if they will allow online sale or how they expect retailers to enforce minimum age requirement. Purchasing online and receiving home delivery will create additional problems. As you know, it is pretty easy to lie about your age when you are in front of a computer screen. Le Daily Telegraph de Londres publiait le 1er janvier such as Instagram and Snapchat to sell illegal substances to young people, experts have warned. Young workers said distributing trend had rapidly accelerated within the last 18 months, with dealers using the platform to target children under 13 years old. Dans l'étude du projet de loi,
in the study of the bill, we need to look at the means organized crime will use to get around the act once it's adopted. There are tools already being used by criminals to sell their drugs, and yet the bill contains no measures to address this issue that is constantly on the rise. Already, Canada is behind on organized crime. The Conservatives propose some things on marijuana, and that included no longer criminalizing civil possession and giving pardons. This would have been more prudent and would have made mothers and fathers safer, who already see this as a scourge on our society. I have a lot of respect for an individual who was on Radio Canada. They said that the Trudeau government should decriminalize immediately, and then legalization could take more time to try to better legislate. This way to manage marijuana in Canada is against the interests of most Canadians. Honourable Senators, I would invite you to demonstrate responsibility and not hesitate to vote against this bill as we should. Unfortunately, after 109 witnesses in the other place, MPs passed only a few amendments. This is important legislation that we are called to being voted upon in this place. And when you study this bill, keep in mind the interests of young people and not the cannabis industry and its lobbyists. Think, first of all, about our youth and the most vulnerable for whom marijuana legalization will put them into an infernal cycle, and they will be fighting for their survival. 30 seconds? 30 seconds. 5 minutes? Would you like an additional 5 minutes? Thank you very much. I will conclude by saying that Canada can and must do better and differently to protect its youth. I will not repeat it again. In Quebec, in ERs, nearly 50% of cases of psychosis are cases of cannabis intoxication, 50%. So I would invite you to caution. Cannabis intoxication, cannabis psychosis can be permanent. I will tell you the story of a doctor friend who's around my age. He at age 34, he finished his study and he has no hope of developing full abilities. Marijuana is a drug. Marijuana is not a cigarette. It is 10 times as powerful now than it was. And so I invite you on behalf of the children of Canada to be very careful and to take our time to ensure that there are no more victims than there are today. Thank you.